Welcome to SAM Conversations, a video program of South Asia Monitor. And today's topic is wine. Yes, you have heard it right. We're going to talk wine today with Mr. Subhash Arora, who, for want of a better description, we'll call him wine evangelist. He's president of the Indian Wine Academy. He was one of the founders of the delWine Club. He's the editor of a global online wine newsletter called delWine. And today, if one person is associated in promoting the growing wine culture in India, it is Subhash Arora. Welcome to the show, Subhash.
Thank you.
We also have with us Nirupama Sekhri. She's been part of an international flight crew. She knows the wines we are going to talk about. And she's also been an educator and a writer on social and lifestyle issues. Welcome to the show. Okay, Subhash. So we start by discussing about the growing wine interest in our country and possibly in this region. Before we discuss about what is it that is making wine a much sought after drink now in family drawing rooms and in social occasions, can you take us back a little and tell us about the history of wine in this country and whether it is just something that has been there because it was imported by our colonial rulers, or whether it has been there through history, through various rules that,
If you talk of history, you can, of course, like any other country, you talk about wine being consumed 5,000 years ago, Somras and all those things, but that doesn't interest me particularly because if at all it was there, it was different, in different form. But what's very interesting is that when the Mughals were here in India, they used to get wine from Shiraz. They were businessmen, traders who used to meet the kings and the royals. They used to drink wine. Some of them even grew some wine. That is one phase of history. But then when the British were here, they were also interested in promoting wine to an extent that there were areas near Kashmir, for example, they were making wine. And I do remember in 1889 or 84, somewhere there was a exhibition in Calcutta where the wines were there from all over the world, and Indian wines also won some medals over there. But then what happened in the 1900 or so, 1890 to 1900, phylloxera hit the world. The most of the vineyards were just kaput. And so India also suffered, and so they were all gone. But then because of the Indians opposing alcohol, British did not encourage the restarting of the production of wine, so that stopped. And then you go back to like about 60s, where Portuguese influence in Goa, they started making some kind of a local wine or importing some wine from Portugal, because Portuguese to drink a lot of wine, and Goan influence was there. So they started making what they call fortified wine, and they started producing this wine in the 70s. And so between 70s and 95, you had all those Golconda and all those wines, which are fortified wines, cheap wines, costing less than 100 rupees, maybe 60 to 80 rupees. And we were drinking that. And then the Indij came in 1984, around that time, and they started making wine with some collaboration. And they took off fairly well. And of course, the modern winemaking, really, I put it to wineries like Grover and Sula, who started making with varietals, different grapes. And so that is what is taken off. Indij, of course, has gone kaput now. They got bankrupt, but others, they have taken off.
But so would you say wine drinking really took off of the opening of the Indian market after liberalization, or was it before that?
Okay, well, I would say it had started before that in a small way. I used to drink wine in the 80s and 90s when, of course, a lot of bootlegged wines were available from abroad. And Indian wines, I remember Marquis de Pompadour was brought in by Chateau Indij in 85, 86, and it became fairly popular. And then they brought Riviera in the 90s, which was quite popular. But you're right, the real growth started in 2001 and 2002. Because 2001 is when the government allowed the import of wine. It was not there earlier. And 99, Sula had already started the production, and Grover had started the production. So both the streams started growing a little bit,
Wine was largely drunk by men in India. When did women start taking to wine? And now you hear more of women drinking wine than men. When did the change?
In fact, I sort of disagree with you in the sense that wine has always been considered a woman's drink in India. Because
always,
even before, meaning, in the 90s, when men were drinking whiskey, they would have their wives normally drink a glass of sherry or port, sometimes Madeira, because these are, sweet wines, and women would have a glass or two of that, and that was it. But always, when I started getting into wine, and people told me, yeah, you are a man now, you don't drink wine, women drink wine. I said, forget it. But men are definitely much more into wine, globally, and in fact the women were not given too much importance in the industry all over the world till about 80s and 90s. Women were considered, people were pretty backward. There's a women's place is in the house and all that. It was there internationally also. So since 80s and 90s it changed, and now women are ahead. And the other thing where you're right is that the husbands in India, or the men, male chauvinists, they would love to have whiskey or get drunk, but they don't want their wives to get drunk because they know the harm it does to you, or the bad things it can make you happen. So, but wine is okay, it's like a juice. You can have a glass of wine. So this is how women got into it, and it's a very nice, soft, easy drink. So they encourage it, and so today, middle-class women, I go to Maharashtra, for example, even upper class women, I see them drinking wine. It's a good feeling, but they are encouraged that.
As you said, India has always been a hard liquor drinking country, and wine drinking has been associated with women. What has been your experience? You have been part of an international flight crew, and what has been your different experience when dealing with Indian passengers vis-a-vis, say, international other passengers when you were part of the crew?
So I think it's exactly what Mr. Arora was saying, that the Indian men, as soon as they get on, they want the whiskey. They're whiskey drinkers. And wine has now slowly started to sort of percolate into, it's looked at more as a fine kind of drinking. Yeah. It's looked at as a sophisticated
It's a lifestyle product.
So yes, so I think now more and more people are drinking it. Like you said, even men. You can see it the way it's grown in just menus. In restaurants across the city and all. But one thing I wanted to ask you was that when we are growing wine, because India has also started, a lot of vineyards have started here. So what are the weather and soil? Is it just very specific particular places that can grow, wine grapes?
Well, there are a few parameters that define in terms of soil, in terms of climate. And I personally feel that Nasik is not necessarily the best in terms of climate, but it's fairly good. But interestingly enough, if you look at the international map of wine, India is not at the proper latitude. It is supposed to be about 28 to 42, 45 degrees latitude, but India is like 12, 13, 11 degrees. But because of the various viticultural techniques that have come in, India has become a part of the process where we can make wine. We cannot make great wine because of those the classifications of climate and day and night temperatures, the maximum temperatures and minimum temperatures. The best is if you have the summer temperatures like 30, 35. Now Nasik has about 35 degrees. And the lower temperature could be 10, 15 degrees, so Nasik also has that. So it's a question of soil, which is not necessarily the best soil, but yes, that is one area which is doing pretty well. And of course, Karnataka is there, is very good area. Andhra is another very good area, but the government doesn't encourage that. And of course, Uttarakhand and Himachal, I think they are the best areas in the foothills. But again, it's a question of political values or political ambitions of the state. And I think if the government were to pursue it further, you will see more areas coming up in future.
Now, when you're talking about the Nashik area and also in Karnataka, the Nashik area, I've read the Sahyadri Valley. This is also known as the Napa Valley of India. And a whole lot of wineries have
It's known because people like us, the journalists, the producer, everybody says it's the Napa Valley. It's far from it. But yes, I think in today's conditions, it's doing pretty well. They were eating grapes much earlier. And India today is number 7 in the world in terms of production of grapes. These are OIE figures. And of course, over 90% are eating grapes. So the technology, viticulture practices was there. Although wine producing is different than with other grapes growing, but they had the basics, so that's why it progressed, and that's where it became Nasik. It started growing grapes, and it became the Napa Valley.
So are we just doing wine for domestic consumption, or are we actually exporting some?
You know, I have been a great promoter for export of wines, but the domestic producers never agreed with me on that initially for the past 10 years at least, because they were able to sell whatever they produced. Export-wise, we are not competitive in terms of pricing. So they were not doing that.
But didn't we start exporting recently? I read one of your
No,
articles
but
which
yes,
talked
it
about
was about 15 years or so they started. They were doing very small quantities, but now they are increasing. The emphasis is more on export. And I think export is very, very important in any industry, because that gives you the international standing of your product. And so now, because of exports, they're improving the quality. Many of our wines are world class. Maybe they're not as cheap or as competitive, but in terms of quality, they're pretty good. So that's what makes it kind of benchmark, I think.
You talked about, and you've written about, this government being a big impediment in the growth of the wine industry in India, and there are whole kinds of unnecessary taxes and regulations. You just talked about how you could optimize on the wine that are grown in Uttarakhand area or Andhra Pradesh, but they are not making proper use of it. What exactly could you detail the kind of
first of all,
taxes and regulations that come in the growth?
Yeah. I think first of all we should know that our constitution encourages prohibition. That is a key factor. So all the states, they have been asked by the constitution to enforce prohibition. And that's why you see politicians all the time coming with this byline or tagline or punchline that we are going to have a prohibition. But they get so many taxes that they keep on increasing the taxes and keep on saying that we are trying to follow the constitution, because we are saying increase the taxes so people will drink less. So that is the thing they're doing, and they're being very foolish and very myopic about it, I think, because this is an industry which can make, it's a labor intensive industry. We have a lot of land and there are areas which we can explore, and we can be a world force in production of wine in terms of giving job to the farmers. Here the farmers are committing suicide, but I know that there is so much can be done in wine, and wine is in an area where it doesn't need very fertile land also. So one can explore more further, but only if government gives some encouragement. So the government impediment is two ways. One is the import duty for importing the product, which is only for imported wines, of course. But the local duties, the local taxes are very high, and it makes the product very uncompetitive, and we are not able to progress as much as we could.
So one of the things that I remember in China, the way they were promoting wine, especially red wine, was saying that it's very healthy. I mean, is that...
I don't want to sound anti-Chinese, but China people are slightly foolish. You're right that they were told that red wine is good for health, and they blindly started drinking red wine even if they hated it. In India also, to some extent, it's true. We are, with the kind of climate we have in Delhi and Mumbai and all these places, we should be drinking more white wine. But since we've been told, and I tell people all the time, that red wine is more healthy. So therefore, people drink more of red wine, even if they don't enjoy it. But of course, there are ways of enjoying red wine also. If served properly, it can be very delicious. So China, the government policy was very simple. The people were drinking a lot of alcohol made from rice and cereal. So government wanted to discourage that, because that's the cereal for eating. So they wanted people to get away. So they encouraged wines from fruit, which is grapes. And they have been encouraging in such a big way that they are going to be number one in our lifetime or your lifetime, definitely. They are going to be up there. The production is going all the time.
Subhash,
sorry.
What Nirupama was asking about, the so-called health benefits of
Absolutely,
wine.
yes. Yeah.
Now, you've also written about, read your articles where you talked about that wine should not be seen as a spirit, but more as a medicine.
Yes.
How do you say that?
Okay. See, I've attended many international conferences in America, where the doctors from the US, UK, and all over the world have been congregating. And there have been a lot of studies that were done in the, let's say, 80s and 90s, which proved that red wine had, of course, it has a compound called resveratrol, which is a chemical compound. It's found in the grape skins and the pips. And that kind of elongates your lifetime. It's antioxidant. And that is what really helps you more than the alcohol in the wine. And I think it elongates the lifetime. So that is what has been very important.
But does it also have anti-cancer properties? That's what I have read somewhere, and also.
I'm sorry, that is no. I don't agree with any of the studies or anything people say. If at all, it increases the chances of cancer. Definitely, and I'm very candid about it. But at the same time, especially for women, actually the chance of a woman getting a breast cancer goes up by 10%, even if you have 1 glass of wine a day. But if you are smart enough, there are studies that have shown that if you take folates are very cheap. I think you get 2-3 rupees a patta or something, you know. So you take folates regularly, that chance is neutralized.
Yes.
And then, you know, the chance increases after 2 or 3 drinks. And that's why I say drink wine, but drink in moderation. Not more than 3 glasses a day for men and not more than 2 glasses for women. That is the absolute maximum. And preferably with food. That's where it is different than whiskey, because when you have with food, it's kind of, you know, in the process of digestion, it breaks down the alcohol. And what you have the stuff going through kidney is not a toxic chemical necessarily.
So is it an acquired taste?
I would, yes and no. I mean, I was a teetotaler all my life. In America, I never drank wine. But the first time I took a white wine, fruity white wine, I loved it. I really liked it. And I think there are many wines available, especially from a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. And I openly tell that to everybody, that first time when somebody is drinking, you give them that wine, man or a woman, they would love it. And they will fall for it. Okay, this is something that I want to try. But if you drink something like you were earlier talking about wine with tannins, wine with bitter taste and all that, now that is something which you need to acquire taste for. The fine wines, which are, you know, very aged wine, very complex wine, those are the ones you need to acquire some taste for. But normally, I would say the young wines, you can drink any wine which is fruity, but like I said, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or even Indian Sauvignon Blanc generally are pretty nice, good wines. Riesling from Sula is slightly sweet. You have a sip or have a glass of it, you would love it. Anybody who doesn't drink would like it.
Is it true, Subhash, that young people, more and more young people in India are taking to wine and going away from hard drinks?
You know, that's true.
And that's a welcome
that
sign,
is
and that is because
very
of
true.
More and more wine clubs coming across the country.
Very correct, very correct. I think the hope is that the young generation drinks more wine. They're more sophisticated. Wine is definitely a lifestyle drink. Wine is an aspirational drink where, you know, you aspire to drink better wine, and you have arrived when you drink better kind of quality wine. But one thing which has been bothering me, and the first time I'm telling in public, is that the last year or so, and the last 2 years or so abroad and last year or so in India, younger people have started again experimenting more with craft beer and gin. So that is now started competing with wine. Internationally, about 2-3 years ago started, and in India last year. So I think that is a bit of a red flag which I see, and I hope it's an experimental stage for them, and they find out that wine is definitely better.
Is the wine market growing steadily in India, and what future do you see?
No, wine market is growing for sure, and I don't think anybody can stop that, because more and more people try wine, drink wine, enjoy wine, and started drinking wine with food also, which is very important. Unless you start drinking wine with food, you cannot really take it to another level. And drinking wine with food has not been Indian DNA. So it will take some time, but yes, it's going to happen eventually.
Well, thank you, Subhash. That has been a very, very enlightening discussion, and we are all much better informed about wine than we were before we started this. I think we can have many more of such discussions. And thank you for being here with us. And cheers.
Pleasure, it's a pleasure. And I use a word called Jai Ho. Instead of cheers, an Indian word for cheers, I call it Jai Ho.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.